Vera Kowalczyk was 79 years old, 4'11" in her good shoes, and she came off her porch swinging her late husband's fishing net at two grown men trying to load a motorcycle onto a trailer in her own driveway. "That bike belongs to somebody," she shouted, loud enough that Jonah Krieger heard it through her kitchen window and dropped the wrench he'd been using on her leaking pipe. "You put it down right now, or I swear I will call every person I know." The two men hadn't expected a 79-year-old woman to do anything but watch from behind a curtain, and the sight of her coming at them with a fishing net, undeterred by their size or their truck, cost them the 10 seconds they needed to get away clean. Jonah made it outside as their taillights disappeared around the corner, his father's restored 1967 shovelhead still sitting exactly where he'd left it, one strap already halfway around the frame. "You didn't have to do that," Jonah said, breathless. "Somebody was trying to take something that wasn't theirs," Vera said, lowering the net like it was the most ordinary object in the world. "I wasn't going to only watch." What Jonah learned about Vera Kowalczyk over the following week would end with 90 motorcycles filling her narrow street in Larch Bend, Minnesota, and a widow who had spent 2 years quietly refusing help from anyone discovering exactly how much a neighborhood can give back when it finally gets the chance. Larch Bend sat among the lake country of northern Minnesota, a town of fewer than 6,000 people where winters ran long and neighbors tended to know each other's business whether they wanted to or not. Jonah Krieger was 39 years old, worked as a firefighter for the county, and had been a member of the Iron Vow Motorcycle Club for 11 years. Riding a 1967 shovelhead his father had restored piece by piece over 2 decades before passing it down the year before he died. Jonah had been stopping by Vera's house every other Saturday for the past 4 months, ever since he noticed her struggling to carry her own trash cans to the curb one morning and decided, without making a production of it, that mowing her lawn and fixing whatever needed fixing was something he'd start doing. Vera never asked him to keep coming back, and had tried more than once to pay him for his time, an offer Jonah refused as gently and as consistently as she made it. He didn't know much about her circumstances beyond what he could observe. A house that needed more repairs than she could keep up with alone. A woman who lived carefully and never once complained about anything, and a fierce, quiet pride that made her deflect every question that veered too close to how she was actually managing. He'd started bringing the shovelhead along on his visits without much thought, parking it in her driveway the way he'd park any vehicle, never once considering that a bike his father had spent 2 decades restoring might attract exactly the kind of attention it eventually did. Before we get any further, if this is your first time here, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because the week after that attempted theft wasn't only about thanking a brave neighbor, it was about a community finally learning how much one widow had been carrying silently and deciding, together, that she wasn't going to carry it alone for one more winter. Now, back 2 years, to the husband Vera lost, and the house she's been holding together ever since. Vera Kowalczyk had been married to Henrik for 53 years before his heart finally gave out on an ordinary Thursday morning, collapsing in the garden he tended every summer of their marriage, and had spent the 2 years since learning, slowly and without much help, exactly how many small tasks a marriage quietly divides between 2 people until only one is left to manage all of them. Henrik had handled the finances, the home repairs, the property taxes, and Vera had trusted him with all of it completely, which meant that when he died, she'd inherited not only his absence, but an entire administrative life she'd never had to learn. She still talked to him sometimes while she watered his tomato plants, quiet enough that no one but the plants ever heard her. She'd fallen behind on property taxes within the first year, not from carelessness, but from genuine confusion about a system Henrik had always managed quietly in the background and by the time she understood the severity of the notices piling up in a drawer she'd stopped opening regularly, the county had already begun the early stages of a tax lien process that would, within another year, put her house at real risk. She had a heart condition of her own that a doctor had recommended addressing with a procedure her insurance covered only partially. A gap of several $1,000s she'd been quietly deciding to live without treating, rather than ask anyone for help affording. Vera's daughter lived 1,100 miles away in Arizona, called every Sunday, and had no idea about any of it, because Vera answered every question about how she was managing with the same practiced, cheerful deflection she'd perfected over 2 years of being alone. Jonah discovered the property tax notices by accident, 3 days after the attempted theft, when he'd stopped by to fix a step on Vera's porch and found an envelope from the county treasurer's office sitting unopened on her kitchen table. The kind of certified mail notice that arrives when patience has officially run out. He'd noticed a small stack of similar envelopes tucked behind a sugar canister the week before too, though he hadn't thought much of it at the time. Vera, embarrassed, tried to wave it off as nothing important. But Jonah had seen enough foreclosure notices delivered to elderly neighbors over his years as a firefighter to recognize exactly what he was looking at. "Vera," he said, quiet, "how far behind are you?" She was silent for a long moment, the particular silence of a proud woman deciding whether 2 years of managing alone had finally reached its limit. 14 months, she whispered finally. "I didn't want to worry Linda. She's got her own family to think about." "And the doctor's letter I saw on the counter last month?" Jonah asked. "The one about your heart?" Vera's composure cracked, faintly. "That can wait," she said. "It's not urgent yet." "Vera," Jonah's voice stayed gentle, "you defended my father's motorcycle with a fishing net 3 days ago. Let somebody defend you back." Jonah didn't ask Vera's permission before he acted, correctly guessing she'd refuse if given the chance to. He called the chapter that evening and laid out exactly what he'd found. A widow 14 months behind on property taxes. A heart procedure she'd been postponing to avoid the cost. And a fierce, quiet pride that had kept her from asking anyone for the help she badly needed. Word moved through the Iron Vow the way it always did once a story like Vera's reached the right ears. Fast. And without needing much repetition. A member who worked in county records helped calculate exactly what was owed on the tax lien. A chapter brother whose wife worked at the regional hospital made a call about the heart procedure's remaining balance. Within 4 days, the full picture had come together. $11,000 in back taxes and penalties, and nearly $6,000 in medical costs standing between Vera and both her house and her health. The chapter raised the full amount within the week, donations moving through the same network that had once, quietly, helped a diner owner and a wrongly detained veteran, and a dozen other families across the region nobody outside the club ever heard about. Jonah asked Vera to be home on Saturday afternoon, telling her only that some friends wanted to properly thank her for what she'd done. Vera assumed a handful of riders might stop by with a card, maybe a pie. Engines, first, and then chrome filling her narrow street from end to end as the afternoon light settled gold over the lake behind her house. 90 motorcycles rolling in from every direction, filling her driveway, her neighbors' driveways, and the shoulder of the road for 3 houses in either direction. Engines dying in sequence until Larch Bend held nothing but the tick of 90 cooling engines and a silence deep enough that Vera, standing on her own porch in her good church dress, pressed both hands over her mouth without saying a word. Neighbors who'd lived beside her for a decade without knowing much beyond her name came out to their own porches, phones already raised. Not one rider treated the moment like a spectacle. They filled that street with the same quiet purpose Vera herself had shown 3 days earlier, standing her ground for something that mattered to somebody else. Jonah climbed the porch steps first, holding an envelope in both hands. "Vera," he said, "your property taxes are paid in full. All 14 months, plus the penalties. And your procedure is covered too. Every cent." Vera stared at the envelope like it might dissolve if she reached for it too quickly. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I only did what anyone would have done." "Not anyone," Jonah said. "You did it without hesitating, at 79 years old, with a fishing net, for a man you barely knew 4 months ago." He pressed the envelope into her hands. "This isn't charity, Vera. This is a neighborhood paying its debts." Vera's knees nearly went out from under her right there on the porch, and it was the 90 strangers standing quietly in her yard, not the money itself, that finally broke through 2 years of careful, lonely composure. She cried the way a person cries when relief finally arrives heavier than the fear it's replacing, and didn't try to hide it from a single one of them. Her daughter Linda flew in the following weekend, having finally heard the full story, and stayed a full 10 days helping Vera set up automatic bill payments and a proper filing system so 2 years of quiet confusion would never happen again. Linda cried on the phone with Jonah before she'd even landed, thanking him in a voice thick with the particular guilt of a daughter who'd been calling every Sunday without ever once catching what her mother had been hiding. Vera's heart procedure went smoothly a month later, and she recovered at home with a rotation of chapter members stopping by daily to check on her. An arrangement that started as concern and settled, within weeks, into something considerably warmer. Jonah still comes by every other Saturday, though these days there's rarely anything left to fix, and the two of them mostly sit on her porch with coffee. Vera asking after his shifts at the firehouse, Jonah asking after her garden. Two people who found each other through a stranger's attempted theft and decided, afterward, that the friendship was worth keeping regardless. If this story reached you, if you believe that the smallest act of fearless kindness has a way of finding its way back tenfold, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs reminding that standing up for somebody else, even at 79 years old, with nothing but a fishing net, is never wasted effort. Subscribe to Iron Vow Stories so you never miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, what's the bravest thing you've ever seen an unlikely person do?